went against mainstream because I started researching. I started my own school for autistic children, for hopeless, not autistic, hopeless, unmanageable, unteachable children. And the first society in Ukraine it was, yes, Autism Society. But I was much more interested in sensory perception than the triad of impairments. Of course, what happened, I became a laughing stock, even in the West, because nobody was interested in this at the time. Anyway, so I will try to give you as much as possible of the results of my research for all those years. And we will start with, to reconstruct the sensory world of autism. Because, again, to remind you, the best theory is the iceberg theory of autism. What we see, these are autistic behaviors. Of course, they help us to diagnose autism, of course, but they don't tell us what is going on and why. So causes, they are at the very bottom of the iceberg, and you can see there are so many question marks because we don't know what causes are, or we do know that there are many, and I do mean many possible causes of autism, leading to the same clinical pictures of behaviors. So what is interesting is what is between these causes and the autistic behaviors. So, and that is why there are so many psychological theories. Some of them are very influential, and which claim they can explain autism. One of the most popular is a theory, a lack of theory of mind, okay, and weak central coherence theory, and many others. But this theory of mind, it means we all, those who have no autism, the ability to perceive the mental states of others. And the researchers say autistic people, autistic children and adults, they don't understand our intentions, they don't understand our behaviors, they don't understand our emotions. Absolutely right. And they say that is why they lack theory of mind. Absolutely wrong. Because the question is, do we understand their behaviors? Do we understand their intentions? Do we understand their emotions? No, we don't. It means we lack theory of autistic mind, right? And of course, we invent, design tests to check this theory of mind. I'm not talking about salient N test. I think everybody knows about it, right? That autistic children often get it wrong. But let us think about this, that theory of mind developed in in non-autistic children by the age of 4, but we can see autism well before that age. And by the way, the first symptoms we can see are sensory symptoms, not social and communication symptoms. So in autism, okay, let us agree, lack theory of mind, but again, think about independent variables. For example, when the mother looks at her baby, starts smiling, you know, and whatever, the baby says, yes, mother is smiling, she is happy, the baby learns the first grains of theory of mind. But what if, look at this stupid woman who is trying to hug her baby. If you don't see this, the baby is crying actually, and she is smiling. What will the baby learn? The baby couldn't tolerate any touch. You know what I mean? So the baby will connect. When mother is smiling, I am in pain. Okay? Of course it goes differently. It's not that they lack it. They make different connections. Or when we punish children, go to your room, think about your behavior. Punishment, right? For this autistic boy who is so happy to avoid all this chaotic environment, who is sitting in his room. Look how relaxed and happy he is. So again, is it a punishment? You know what I mean? The boy learns theory of mind, but making different connections, right? So some conclusions about this. Shared experiences, shared theory of mind. No shared experiences, lack of theory of mind. So we all, not that they lack theory, we all lack theory of autistic mind, okay? So who is mind blind, right? And I would take this theory a bit further And for example, do professionals who work with autism from 9 till 4, 5, or whatever understand parents who live with autism 24/7? No. Just trust me, theoretically it is possible, in practice, no. It means professionals lack theory of parents' mind, right? But on the other hand, do parents who have 1, 2, 3 children on the spectrum, for example, and they want the best for their babies, understand professionals who have hundreds and limited resources? No. So parents lack theory of professionals' mind. You know what I mean? We have to learn to look at everything from different perspectives, not only with autistic people, but specialists and parents. So, theory of mind does not explain autism. It is very helpful, right? But it does not explain autism. So what is in between the psychological theories and causes, right? And this is SPATS. It's not my idea. It is Bob Morris, a high-functioning adult with autism. And he said, our senses work differently. It means we have different perceptions. It means we develop different abilities. And it means we think differently. So let us start with senses, right? We all people have 7 senses: vision, hearing, tactility, a sense of smell, sense of taste, proprioception and interoception, and vestibular system. By the way, any of these senses or a combination of the senses can be different in autism, work differently in autism. Especially proprioception is very, very important sense in autism. Proprioception, it is about our body awareness, how we move our limbs, how we sort of feel ourselves in our bodies. We know that many autistic people, adults and children, have problems with this. Some of them do not feel that when their body ends and the environment begins. Can you imagine how frightening it might be? Or we can call about interoception. It means about inner receptors, receptors inside our body, which tell us that we are hungry or that it is time to go to the toilet, for example. Because many autistic children can go without any food for hours if they are not reminded, because their body doesn't tell them you're hungry, you have to eat something. Or we know children and adults who will eat and eat and eat. They don't know when to stop because their body doesn't tell them you're full, it's enough. And so on. The same with going to the toilet. By the way, I will give you this strategy straight away. I thought it was my invention. I was absolutely wrong because it was Donna Williams. Because when my son was young, by the way, he didn't talk till he was 7. Only, these meltdowns, whatever, screaming, but not a word. But some toilet training didn't go quite well. But at the time, I had a baby daughter as well. And by the way, became suddenly a single mother, because not all men can not feel ashamed of, of their disabled son. Anyway. And so it was really, really difficult. 5-year-old boy and still not toilet trained. I came up with this solution and it worked. I created a timetable for him. In the morning, the first thing you do, toilet. Whether you want it or not, it doesn't matter. You sit on the toilet. Sort of before every meal, before we go out, before going to bed and so on, it worked. And only later, 10 years later, I learned that Donna Williams used very similar strategies for herself. So just a strategy, or I will forget about it. So what is perception? Perception is a process by which our organism collects information from the senses, interprets this information, and acts on it, knows what to do. For example, there are several stages. The first stage is sensation. It is when we see something, but we don't know what it is yet. When we, for example, if I touch something like this object, I feel it, right? But I don't know what it is yet. So this is sensation. And then the next stage is interpretation. It means, oh, I know, I recognize what it is. It is a book. And the next stage, the last one, it is comprehension. I know what I can do with it. I can read it, for example, right? In the past, it was believed that the problems autistic people experienced were at the stage of either interpretation or comprehension. And that is why perhaps they were diagnosed with retardation or whatever. But in fact, the most, not only problems, but differences start already at the stage of sensation. They see, hear, smell, feel everything differently. And it means they do interpret, but their interpretations are very different from ours. And they do comprehend, but again, their understanding is different. But as we always say, they lack this, they have deficits in that, whatever. What about our perception? It's like theory of mind, right? We are born with our perception, we develop it, and whatever. Is it perfect? Or our interpretation of the world is based on our memory experiences? I want to show you that normal, so-called normal perception is absolutely not perfect, and it is not accurate. If you look at this picture, what can you see? Come on. Any ideas? Dalmatian, leopard, somebody said. Yes, anything else? Because I will give you the right answer now. If you, again, look at this picture very, very carefully, and I will tell you what it is. And you will recognize it immediately, I promise. Because these are black spots on the white background. Right? But as we try to find meaning in everything, we try to interpret whatever we are shown, right? That's what I'm trying to say. We see sometimes more than really exists in front of our eyes. Again, the real world and our mental image of this world differ. For example, again, what is it? Now you know, right? Anyway, because many see the letter, some stare, or whatever. These are broken lines, right? And then we can interpret whatever we see. And again, another thing, yes, the triangle doesn't exist, right? There are these three black things. But we see it, whether we want it or not, right? Because we've got it in our mind already. So what we do, we take a shortcut. We look at something without all this process to interpret what it, and we come to the conclusion, right? Oh, this is a triangle. And what is more, with age, we distort everything even more. The older we become, the more our perception is distorted. For example, if the question is, who is the tallest, right? First, some people say it is the person who is further away, right? From our experience, we know that. But actually, they are the same height. So I do try to show you that we are so sort of also not perfect in our perception. This process is very important. What if one sense is absent? For example, the person is blind or deaf or whatever. And sometimes they have autism as well. But those who have no autism but have no vision, for example, they go through the same process, absolutely the same process. But they don't look at something, they touch it or smell it or whatever. And then they interpret it, that it is a book, and if it is in Braille, they can read it, right? So they're absolutely the same process. In autism, it is very different. This is from Tito's book. You know Tito, a boy who was considered to be very low functioning, but actually his IQ is much, much higher than the average. And he writes books. That's what he said. When I pick up a book, I might turn the pages and sniff each page before looking at the pictures in it. That's what my son did. Like I bought him a lot of books with pictures, but he didn't even look at it. He liked the sound or sometimes the smell. Someone else may tear a page or two. They do like the sound of it as well, or just tactile sensations. And another person with autism may totally ignore it because his perception would be directed towards some other aspects of environment. So the problem is, it is very hard for us to imagine that they see everything differently. They are not blind, are they? Or hear everything differently. Can you imagine how hard it is for them to realize that their perception is very different from the perception of 99% of the population. So a typical thought they might have is, and this is from an American Spicer, he's on the spectrum, there is something wrong with me. I can't do things right. Everyone is mad at me. No matter how hard I try, something goes wrong. Other people can do things I can't. It must be my fault that I'm having so much trouble. And he wants us to experience what it might be like. He asks us to imagine that, for example, you are colorblind and you cannot distinguish between green and red. And you're a student at school or college, and your teacher hands out sheets of paper with instructions of what to do. But unfortunately, instructions are printed in red on the green background. So everyone but you would start working. Only you would sit there looking at this sheet of paper thinking, what is going on? Why can't I understand that? So I think it's a brilliant illustration. You know, don't forget, we have different perspectives, right? So that we see the world differently. Not our perception is better than theirs and whatever. And many autistic people talk about it. Temple Grandin, she is an advocate of this sensory perceptual differences research because, as she says, many people cannot even imagine that an alternate sensory reality exists because we live in the same physical world, but we perceive it so differently because our senses work differently. And these are just a few quotes from Thomas McKean, a person with an Asperger syndrome. I don't think that what I see is what you see. That is, unless what you see are vague clouds and shadows of substance. Or Ross Blackburn, to me, the outside world is a confusing mass of sights and sounds. It is totally baffling and incomprehensible. Again, McKean. I believe sensory anomalies may be at the root of many, if not all, behaviors that seem inappropriate and bizarre. And many of them talk about the same thing, that our senses work differently. And that is why their behaviors, and this is very important, autistic behaviors, we call them sometimes, right? Their behaviors are meaningful and functional. And as Donna says, that very helpful people were trying to help her to overcome her ignorance, right? And to teach her the right behaviors. But they were ignorant themselves because they never tried to understand the way she saw the world. Another thing is, when I started this research, as I said, not many people were interested. But now there are hundreds and hundreds of research papers, articles, books on sensory dysfunction. I should be happy I am not, because it's not necessarily dysfunctional. Sometimes the environment makes it dysfunctional, not all the times, but sometimes. And that's why it is much more useful to use this general term, different sensory experiences. And for example, some children and adults with autism cannot tolerate fluorescent lights because for us it is just, constant light. For them, they actually can see a 60 cycle flickering. It's like disco club, Can you imagine sitting in a room when the room goes like dark and bright? How long will you tolerate it? And if demands are being made on you, you will exhibit challenging behaviors, I'm pretty sure. And we will start our journey, if you like, through the sensory world of autism with my favorite quote. This is an Irish woman with autism, Jasmine O'Neill. That's what she says. Learning how each individual autistic person's senses function is one crucial key to understanding that person. Not social problems, communication problems, they come later. And also not all of them are problems. And just again, to conclude and start the next part of our journey, let us remember that different sensory experiences lead to different perceptual, linguistic, cognitive, and even cultural worlds. So we all live on the same planet, the same physical world, but actually we live in two parallel ones, sensory and perceptual worlds. They are very, very different. So what is the point if we cannot sort of cooperate like this, living behind this wall? And the main question today is, whose reality is more real? And to sort of try to take their perspective, we have to learn to switch from one perspective to their perspective. For example, like this, you cannot see two pictures here simultaneously, you just can't. But if you switch your perspective, you can see a young woman and an old woman, right? You have to switch it. Can you see young and old woman? Yeah? But you cannot see them simultaneously, so that's what we have to do. We have to learn to switch from our normal perception to the perception of the child we live or work with, or with adults and so on. And another problem is, when we talk about sensory problems in autism, and there are many, of course, yes, the majority think about hypersensitivities and imagine a child covering his ears, for example, or, like something, a child flapping something in front of his eyes. They think about this over hypersensitivities. This is again wrong, because hypersensitivities are consequences of some other sensory perceptual differences. And one of them has a name, and it is one of the most important. It is either Gestalt perception, or sometimes it is called sensory gating deficit. And here is the definition: the inability to distinguish between foreground and background information. Or, as Donna said, it was like having a brain with no sieve. And this is the research that confirms this theory, not all of it, but some. For example, it is like they cannot distinguish what is important or not important at the stage of sensation, because hundreds and hundreds of stimuli come in, and they're equally important at this stage. We know children or adults who will notice a piece of fluff on the floor because it jumps out at them. It is as important as something on the table, for example, or who notices a hole in a wall, and so on and so forth. And another thing, auditory gestalt, for example, it is like when somebody starts hearing my voice, right, to understand what I am talking about. But at the same time, can you hear the sound coming from that? It's terrible, isn't it? Really, it is terrible. And then the sounds, people walking outside, water in the pipes. All these sounds are equally, at the stage of sensation, important. And there are no filters. And that is why even high-functioning people cannot talk properly, cannot understand their communicative partner if there are several people talking in the same room. It's impossible. If they try to screen out all these extra, not necessary noises, they will screen out the voice of their communicative partner. So another definition is perception of the whole scene as a single entity, with all the details perceived at the stage of sensation, perceived, not processed, not interpreted yet, simultaneously. And here, any tiny change and it will be a different gestalt, okay? So that's how it works. Because if they perceive at the stage of sensation all the stimuli, this is perception of the whole scene as one entity. Any tiny change and it is a different gestalt, and they don't know what to do. Kerner, in his seminal paper in 1943, noticed this. Of course, he didn't call it gestalt or sensory gating deficit, but he writes about it. The inability to experience wholes without full attention to constituent parts. A situation, a sentence, is not regarded as complete if it is not made up of exactly the same elements that were present at the time the child was confronted with it. And the insistence on sameness led several of the children to become greatly disturbed upon the sight of anything broken or incomplete. And so even every activity should be started with this, and then that, nothing should be sort of left out. And that is why when the child starts talking, for example, to you about his or her special interest, I don't know, train timetables, dinosaurs, astronomy, whatever. And of course the child cannot see that you are bored and you want to finish this conversation. And if you try to interrupt him, he would start from the beginning again. Because it is one, you know what I mean? That's why if you are in a hurry, please don't interrupt them. And it's really important. And another thing, any tiny change and they don't know what to do. And it means it brings panic. It's not safe if they don't know what happens next. And by the way, as I travel a lot in Europe and Latin America, and England is the only country where so many roadworks. You know what happens when with residential for adults with autism, especially non-verbal, the staff want to take them to the swimming pool, right? And there is an arrow, diverting arrow. We had a lot of problems, in the minibus, because they thought they were taken somewhere else. They were going to the swimming pool, but were taken somewhere else. And we cannot predict it if we tell them, you know what I mean, from the very beginning. But it's impossible. In the morning you go and there is nothing. In the afternoon you go and they're digging another hole. And so that is why a lot of problems because of this. But the explanation is here. We have to do something about it to make them feel safer. So every situation is unique. And again, this is from Tito. Any tiny change, and the gestalt is different. When his mother bought him a new pair of shoes when he was a small child, he said, "My feet forgot how to walk." The feeling on his feet was so different, and he couldn't. So any tiny change and all the skills are inapplicable. And Tito calls it a mental map. He said that it is a mental picture I form which I expect to face in the process of events, so that I am not surprised or shocked by any sudden situation. I have a mental map of how things should happen around me. When they do not take place as expected, the anxiety is no less than any physical pain. It produces an amplified sensation throughout my gut. I want to emphasize, we are talking about pain, really. And anxiety, it is terrible. It's really, really bad. And of course, my son called it panic attacks. Panic attacks, because when something goes wrong. And that is why any tiny change, and they find it so difficult to learn generalization. For example, if you teach a child that this object is a plate, they are very clever, he will remember this is a plate. But next day you will show this object and you will say this is a plate. No, it isn't. It cannot be a plate, it is different. And the same goes, if this is a spoon, this cannot be a spoon. They do become flexible, they do learn to generalize, but we have to provide them more experiences with the same, functional objects, right? Different plates in different situations with different people. For example, some children would react only to one voice in the classroom and wouldn't answer questions from somebody else. The more experiences they have, the better it becomes, the more flexible they become. They learn to generalize. So it's not that they are really, they are learning, but they have different sort of strategies to learn. Show them all these experiences with the same functional objects, situations, and so on and so forth. Once, I visited a residential for, again, adults with autism, And it was such a sunny day and summer, and it's such a rare sunny day. You know, you can miss it in summer when you make tea in the kitchen. But it was really brilliant. And all the service users were in their own rooms. And the staff were sitting in the kitchen, you know, talking. So why don't you take them anywhere? Or we suggested to go to the Chester Zoo, and they refused. And we respect their choice. It wasn't a choice. They had never been to the Chester Zoo before. And if you suggest something, how would they know? Of course, they would say no, it's the easiest way out. We have to give them more experiences, not less, to help them function in this world. And the same goes for rituals and routines, because rituals and routines help them feel what is going on next. You know, it's just to go through the day. Again, they do become flexible, but we have to respect these routines, especially with children, and work with this. Okay, what we can do to help? If we know that this child has this visual gestalt or sensory gain deficit, then this too bright, too colorful, too environment with hundreds of whatever visual stimuli are very, very bad for them. Because I remember many years ago there was this policy, government policy, learning should be fun. And you know, you go to schools and all the walls covered with whatever. For somebody with visual gestalt, it is not funny. It's nearly impossible to learn. And the same auditory gestalt, you know this, so we have to find a sort of more quiet place for this child, where the child can recharge his or her batteries. You know, we included one teenager with Asperger's syndrome, because academically he was really, really bright and good. In his special school, he was really, really good. His results were good, but then we included him, and the results went downhill because he couldn't tolerate much noise, and he spent most of the time in the school in the cubicle, in the toilet cubicle, the quietest place he found. And that's why, see, we have to pay more attention to the sensory differences of different children and create some sort of safe environment. We can't teach them if they don't feel safe. And then structure and routine helps, because even if the child is anxious, at least the place itself will tell him what he's supposed to do. Here you have your classes, here you have your meal, here you play, and so on. And the same goes about structure of time. Monday, 9 o'clock, it is mathematics or whatever. You know, it helps. And by the way, we all need some structure, right, a routine. And another thing, unpredictability is the main enemy. And that is why, if it is possible, and we know what will happen about any change, talk to them. Whether they're verbal, non-verbal, use pictures, explain what and why will change. You can reason with autistic children even. You can, you know, they do accept changes if they know what and why will change. And many of them don't like surprises, right? Even pleasant surprises, because some children cannot. The worst time for them is Christmas time. Even if their parents bought something they liked very much, still, you know, this when they unwrap this, it is too much. They didn't know what was inside the box, so sometimes Christmas is ruined. Anyway, if we work with them, cooperate with them, it will make our life and their life easier. And another thing, let them have a safety object. It can be anything. We know children and some adults even insist on carrying something, a toy, a spoon, a twig, whatever, with them all the time. And look at this boy. You can see this is just a card, you know, just nothing, no pictures, nothing. But look how relaxed he is. For whatever reason, it helps him to feel safer, you know. And sometimes, like I'll show you this. This is the same boy, 5 years in between two countries. And you can see the same toy, though it is not a toy for the boy. It is like that card, whatever, it is a safety object. The same toy with him, right? If you cannot see what it is Rudolph, the reindeer. And we got it free, in Boots. The film developed and you got this free toy. It saved our lives many, many times. For whatever reason, he didn't associate it with Christmas or Rudolph. For whatever reason, he called it gnome. And this gnome went to many holidays with us, and I couldn't believe it. We could sleep at night in the hotel because this gnome was with him. He was under his chin, or he was, and that is it. He didn't play with gnome as a toy. He felt safer. And of course, you can imagine this is 5 years, and then 5 years more, and now he's 28. Of course, GNOME has been through washing machine hundreds of times, and repairs and all this stuff. So it's retired in his bedroom still, but now we are in elephants. He loves elephants. He's got a collection of elephants, about 25. I brought him many elephants from different countries. And he knows which elephant goes to holiday, which elephant goes to the respite, which elephant goes somewhere else. He doesn't play with this, so it's not sort of embarrassing. He doesn't take it outside now. It's about going somewhere, to the hotel, but different places. The only person, of course, is the maid who cleaned the rooms. She knows this gentleman, 6'3", very handsome, and this elephant on his pillow. But it's her problem, not ours. And because, see, I often asked, is it age appropriate? He's 28. Here, he's about 18, 16. No, it isn't. Absolutely not. Do I care? No. If it makes his life easier, you know what I mean? And more relaxed, it's okay. And we are in elephants. And another thing is, always think about your hobbies. Always think, it is not appropriate. Your hobbies, are they always appropriate? Somebody, I don't know, collects whatever. And my favorite example, and I always talk about it, because it irritates me immensely, and I do nothing, trying to be sort of reserved. What is so enjoyable to watch grown-up men running around one ball? Give them a ball each, let them play. I find it inappropriate. Adults. But I don't switch off TV when, people inappropriately watching it in the pub and whatever. So please let us sort of try to understand them. And another very important phenomenon in autism, it's the inability or difficulty to stop feeling the change. And of course, it leads to overload, hypersensitivity, and other problems. We've always known that structurally, autistic brains are different from non-autistic brains. The problem was that we couldn't find this autism site in the brain, right? In different brains, different areas of the brain were affected. The first researcher who found structural differences in autistic brains is the person whose name is very easy to remember because it is Manuel Casanova. And he researched mini columns in the brains of autistic and non-autistic people and compared them. So first, a mini column is the smallest unit of the brain capable of processing information. And what Casanova found, that mini columns in autistic brains, they do not keep the signal inside. They are vertical, not vertical elements. And he gives this example. If you are taking a shower in the morning and the shower curtain works properly, everything is okay. If the shower curtain is broken, water will be all over the floor in the bathroom. So that's what is happening in autism. The signal goes like fire, and they cannot stop it. For example, when you dress in the morning, put on something on, you feel this only a few seconds, even less. Inhibition occurs, right? And you forget about it. Many of them keep feeling it for hours and hours. They cannot stop feeling it. Or especially, another thing is changing from seasonal weather, from say winter to summer. So it takes them so much longer to get used to feeling trousers, for example, and jumpers, long sleeve jumpers on the skin. And then when it is spring and summertime, it takes weeks to get used to expose their skin again. Or another illustration of this phenomenon. We know many autistic children, especially children, they hate when somebody cuts their nails, right? Sometimes it takes about 5 people, or sometimes parents wait for the child to fall asleep and then crawl into the bedroom to cut the nails, because the same was in my case. He didn't sleep much, so I couldn't do it while he was asleep. But yes, my friends were well trained to do it. And why? Because the torture, whether it is painful or just uncomfortable, the torture doesn't stop the moment the mother puts the scissors away. He keeps feeling it for days. Now, when he can talk, the best he could describe is, my nails is sticky. Perhaps, the air of this touching this cut part of the nail is uncomfortable. Of course, it is possible to desensitize, and we do this, and now he's much better. I mean, he tries to cut his nails himself, and what is more, let me help him, and still complains for about 4 or 5 days, my nails are sticky. And then, when there is no feeling at last, 2 days of happiness, and then it is time to cut the nails again. The torture starts again. So it is a very interesting research and very good explanation. So because of this Gestalt perception, when all the stimuli around us come in unfiltered, and all this inability to stop feeling something, of course it leads to overload, especially in noisy, bright environments, right? So again, we have to remember about it and protect our children. Even if we think everything's okay for them, anything can sort of trigger these behaviors. And sensory overload and Gestalt perception can lead to several different routes, and may result, for example, in system shutdowns. By the way, when they are very young, and perhaps sometimes we don't know that they have problems yet, babies learn to switch off their channels if they are very painful. And that is why many children are suspected to be deaf and referred to tests, hearing, but in fact they are even more hypersensitive than average. But they learn to shut down their hearing to protect themselves. And my son was the same, and when he was about 3 or 4, and I could stand behind him shouting his name, not a blink even, nothing, no reaction. And the nurse was there at the time, and she said, he seems to be deaf. You have to go, and we will send you a referral to a specialist to check his hearing. I didn't even go there because I knew, no. Because if I started unwrapping his favorite biscuits in the kitchen, he would be next to me in seconds. His hearing was even much more hypersensitive. He could hear more, but he learned to switch the channel off. And it can be about any sensory channel. And if it is early in life, of course, self-imposed deprivation, it's not good. That's what Temple Grandin says. When sensory stimulation became too intense, I was able to shut off my hearing and retreat into my own world. And in pulling away, I may not have received stimulation that was required for normal development. She had most problems in her hearing and tactility. So she didn't let anyone to hug her when she was a child, and as she said, so she may have not received all this stimulation. And another scenario is if they continue to try to process all the information coming in, despite their inability to keep up with it, it may result in hypersensitivity, distortions, and anxiety, meltdowns, and so on and so forth. Some teachers say they prefer to work with so-called withdrawn and aloof children, not with the challenging. Of course, challenging children are challenging. And I do understand in a way, because can you imagine this, the child who lives in his or her own world. Their parents bring him to school, the child sits in the corner, perhaps rocking, quite happy, and the teacher is happy, no problem, and then the child goes home. In fact, these children are much, much harder to reach. They've given up on us. They don't want us. It is harder to reach them and sort of bring them to our world. While those whom we call challenging, right, sometimes, well, that's what I hate, aggressive. Because if they are autistic, they are not aggressive, you know what I mean? It's reaction, it's panic attack, it's meltdown, they are not there. They don't want to hurt anyone. That's why I always talk to professionals who work with this, please don't take this personally. Because I do understand you want to do your best, but and they may hit and kick or spit on and whatever. But that's not the aggression, they are not coping. And that's why we have to create the environments where they can learn and desensitize them eventually to many things. Because they have more potential, actually. You know why? It is these individuals who try to keep up because they are motivated to belong, to live together. It is these very individuals. And we sort of punish them, exclude them from schools and whatever. This is absolutely wrong. Yes, we will make mistakes, like all this risk assessment and whatever, I always did it. And still I made many mistakes, and it's understandable. I'll give you just one illustration. When I desensitized my son bit by bit to many things, starting very early, and when, hurrah, he enjoyed the longest film ever in the cinema, and seemingly enjoyed it. It was Harry Potter 1. Do you remember? It's about 3 hours. I was sitting there, oh gosh, and he was happy. He enjoyed it, and we went as a family, because I want us to be a family. He's never been excluded from our activities, but I made a huge mistake because I was too optimistic, and in a few years' time I took him to the latest James Bond film with Pierce Brosnan. It was a huge mistake, because 40 minutes into the film, and it started, I could see overload was there already. And he started kicking the seat in front of him. This Ice Palace, I don't remember the name of the film, and don't tell me, out of principle, I'm never watch it. This cars and noise, and it's so loud, in the cinema. And of course I tried to get him out, because my first advice to anyone was to get him out. Oh no, we are a family, he started shouting. Oh no, we are a family, I want to watch it. He wanted to watch it, he wanted to be with us. He couldn't go. And the public aggravated the situation, because it's so illogical, I find, so illogical. Because there were two battles to win, one on the screen between Pierce Brosnan and this bad guy, and the other between me and my son. And for whatever stupid reason, the public was much more interested in the outcome of the second battle. Because they were sure Pierce Brosnan will win anyway. But I try to bribe him. I rarely do it. But I promised everything, starting with ice cream and ending up with a trip to Mars. And eventually we got out. And you know what happened outside? And he was crying. And he said, I didn't want to hurt you, because he was kicking, And they all there become the most sentimental. I was crying, standing there. Yes, I know, I love you, I know. And the public there as well, there were people there, thought I was crazy, that this very handsome young man was kicking me and whatever. And I was telling him, it's okay, I love you. They just don't understand how much it is, anyway. So what we can do, it is important to recognize the first signs of sensory overload, because it is better to prevent it than to deal with the consequences. And the first signs of overload are very individual for each person. For my son, it is thin lips. His lips become one line. And then it is twitchy movements. He's not in his body. He's not in control. And sort of as soon as I notice the signs, of course, I can get him out for whatever he's doing, activity in the classroom somewhere, whatever. It's important to get him out. And the problem is the time between this, first signs and the consequences, it's very, very short, 30, 40 seconds is usually. And another thing is, I cannot be with him all the time, right? Now I'm here and he is far away in the day center. And that is why it is important to teach them to recognize these first signs, because they are in the body, they are physical. For example, if you know this person, you can see or imagine what she or he is feeling. You can say, if you feel butterflies in your tummy, get out, sit, shut your eyes, shut your ears, because they need this time to recharge their batteries. And of course, special relaxation techniques, occupational therapists, they know what to do, how to do it, to teach them relaxation techniques, and that can be triggered by a smell, for example. When they teach them these techniques, it's good to have scented candles, but with the same smell all the time. And then give them a piece of cloth with the same smell, and they will keep it in the pocket and then to smell it, and it can trigger this relaxation technique. Sounds, again, can be triggers if they use the same sounds during the sessions. There are so many other ways to do it. And of course, first aid kits should be always at hand. Dark glasses, earplugs, squeezy toys, favorite objects, and I need help card. And we have to teach them to use this I need help card. And by the way, not only non-verbal individuals, but also verbal, because during overload, even a very articulate verbal individuals can lose their ability temporarily to talk. So at least they know I give this card to a member of staff and they will help me. Okay, on the other hand, Gestalt perception can account for strengths of autistic people's perception too. There is nothing like good or bad about autism or non-autism. It is always both. Look, non-autism, something is good, something is not very good. The same with autism. They have very good abilities, right, and they have problems. So we should treat it as neutral, right? Autism, we should learn about it. We should learn about the manifestation of autism in each particular person we live or work with, and then it can be a successful journey together. This is by Eric Phipps. I think it's brilliant, isn't it? Every tiny detail is there. And Gestalt perception may result in different experiences and compensatory strategies and perceptual styles. And if you can see the position of hypersensitivity, it is, well, sort of in the middle of the list, not at the beginning. And fragmentation, because you remember weak central coherent theory? Yes, it is good, but it explains this bit of autistic perception. If we go back to sensation, when they see everything, hear everything without interpretation yet and comprehension, no brain is capable of processing of all these hundreds and hundreds of stimuli. It is just impossible, right? That is why they start processing by bit, by bit, by bit, and we get fragmentation. I'll give you just, just a few quotes from people with autism. Donna Williams: I had a fragmented perception of things at the best of times, seeing eyes or a nose or whiskers or a mouth, but mostly putting the bits together in my head. And it's not, she can see at this stage of sensation the whole person, for example, But to interpret who or what is in front of her, it takes her processing bits and pieces. And again, it can be in any sensory modality. This is, for example, from Daniel Tammet, a very high-functioning person, and many others. For example, you know how can they hear? At the stage of sensation, they can hear the whole sentence. For example, John, blah, 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 garden, but process only two pieces, and they have to decide after that what was it about, and it can be in any sensory modality. Another thing is fragmented perception is also distorted perception, but I prefer to distinguish between the two because fragmented it is bits and pieces, and distortions, all sorts of distortions. For example, Thomas McKean, I watched with fascination as my clear vision faded to distortion. I watched as people became objects and shades of clouds. I watched as the reds, blues, and greens became different shades of gray. And Lucy Blackman, she was seeing her hands and the things she was touching as if they were multiplied or overlaid by similar reproductions of itself in duplicate. Again, it's useful to remember they see differently. Because when we teach them, if you work with children, do you use the smiley faces at the end of work, if anyone works? No? Okay. Because for Lucy Blackman, the perception is so different. The faces my teachers trained me to draw had nothing to do with what I conceptualized as a face. I had no idea why the face I expected to draw had a circle and two smaller circles in the top half with a curve below. Though I learned to label these strange shapes as faces, I knew that faces were not like that. Faces consisted of shadows and all sorts of shadows, and if there were not enough shadows, she couldn't understand what is in front of her. So, see, sometimes they have to learn that strange thing is a face. You know, they do learn a lot, and it is harder for them because we don't understand it. What do you think about this portrait of one of the teenager's mother? I absolutely love it. It was presented to me as a gift from this teenager. You know why it is fragmentation, illustration of fragmentation? Because we often call them extraterrestrials or Martians. Don't we look Martians to them? It's always important to look at yourself through their eyes. And this is another mother, a portrait, or not portrait, mother. And this is distortions, not fragmentation. But this one is very recognizable, isn't it? It is me. And just for us to think, always try to switch the perspective. Then let us go back. All the stimuli comes simultaneously at the stage of sensation, processing bit by bit by bit. Of course, they need more time, and they seem to live in a different time zone. And for example, Jared Blackburn, some people think I'm not paying attention when I'm asked a question. Because of the long pause, I often need to process the question and my response, and the blank look I often have while concentrating on such processing. When people try to get my attention, they actually just distract me horribly with their impatience. And that's what we all often do with our children. For example, we ask them a question, a teacher asks a question, for example, at school, and the child sits there with a blank look on his face. But in fact, the child has started processing the question and preparing his or her response. But of course we do want to help, don't we? We ask the same question louder. But for this child, it is a change. It is an absolutely different question. So the child is thrown back. And we want to help more. We start showing something, rephrasing and whatever, confusing the child completely. So it is very important to give them more time to take in your instruction or question. Because sometimes you say, oh, put the chair in the corner, please, and nothing happens. You think, oh, in 5 or 10 minutes the chair is there, right? And another thing is, the information is there, but it takes them sometimes seconds. Like, when a correspondence is somewhere in Syria, and it takes just a few seconds for the sound wave to reach him. That's why for many of them it is seconds. For some it is minutes. For some it is hours, days, months, years. I'm not exaggerating. Have you ever experienced something like an autistic person makes an announcement, absolutely irrelevant and unconnected to this situation? Because sometimes it happens. Uh, and if you know this person, you may say, oh gosh, I asked him about it last Friday. Anything can trigger this. The information is there. So it is important to remember. And what is more, the problem is anything can trigger their memory. Now we will talk about memory because, like this, Tito visited a house with his mother, and he was sort of looking at the magazines there, so he didn't notice anything in the room. But on their way back, when mother started describing, on our way home, far from the real room where I sat sniffing the magazine pages, I began to actually see the room coming back alive in front of my eyes. I could smell every article described by mother: lace curtains, piano, and silver-framed pictures. That's why perhaps they were sort of erroneously misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, because these are not hallucinations. The memory can trigger, and if this person is visual, they can see it, right? Or auditory, they can hear the conversations which were in the past. And what is more, the main problem is the past reality becomes very present reality, right? Because they bring from the past reality the whole package of emotions as well. And if it was negative, suddenly the person can do something, because he is in the past but at present. They may be stuck in an emotion which can escalate out of control. And anything, a word, a combination of sound, certain patterns, smells, movements can trigger their memory. It is so important to know the person, but of course sometimes you can't, it's impossible. But on the other hand, it may be of an advantage because they can sort of answer from memory. For example, like all this, how are you? Many of them will say fine, just from memory, whether they are fine or not, and just response, empty response, which nobody is interested in actually, sort of, but it will make them look very polite. And here it is intensity with which the senses work. Here it is about hypersensitivity. As we have no time, we won't talk too much about it because it's quite well known. It can be visual hypersensitivity. It can be certain tastes, smells, and again, it is like Temple Grandin always talk about it, that they are variable. For some it is, these are slight sort of difficulties. For others, they are very, very severe. And that is why I think one of the best explanations of autism theories is intense world syndrome by Swiss researchers Makram and colleagues. And it means in the past it was believed they are not all connected, I mean, in the brain and whatever. But in fact, they feel too much, they see too much, they perceive too much, and of course, it is too intense for them, and it can be both negative and positive experience. You can see two quotes from the same person, Jasmine O'Neill, and that's what he says: all things are heightened for me. So what a regular person would be tickled with pleasure over, I'll be totally ecstatic. Likewise, someone else's small irritation will turn into a catastrophe for me, like 100 nails screeching a blackboard. But on the other hand, I feel that my autism enables me to experience my surroundings in an intense way, both physically and emotionally. And I have finally developed hearing and smell, and I react to tiny changes in weather patterns and atmosphere pressure much the way the animal would. And that is why they have this special ability to appreciate what they see, hear, smell, touch, and so on. The problem is, it is useless for us because we cannot do it. So we don't even suspect this super ability exists, right? And it is the same if you cannot see the color red, you would never appreciate the beauty of a red rose. So that's why, see, we always focus what they cannot do and their problems, but they have this ability. And another very interesting thing, you know Arthur Clarke, a very famous researcher and science fiction writer, who's predicted many, many future discoveries and inventions, right? I found he made one error, one mistake when he wrote, there are some senses that do not exist, that can probably never be provided by living structures. He said that these organic beings cannot see or feel these radio waves and whatever. He was absolutely wrong, because now we know, and it's not that rare. Temple Grandin writes about her student who has such acute auditory perception that she can hear radio that aren't turned on. If the radio was plugged in, the student could, but turned off, she could hear the programs. And I'm pretty sure that this was the case. My very good friend, she is in her 50s with Asperger's syndrome. She cannot go to bed before she unplugged all the appliances, because she said this microwave. Many people cannot hear the sound. She couldn't sleep if it is still plugged in, radios and TV sets and whatever. And I always ask, what about the fridge? She said, oh, it's always loud. I got used to it. So it's just like a part of any routine. So this ability to hypersense, because there are more senses. Now, some of them, there were reports, I haven't met any individual like this yet, they feel radiation, around them. So it's interesting. It's an interesting sort of development in research. But this ability to hypersense, sometimes they may look like extrasensory perception, but there is nothing extrasensory about it. This is like a very acute, intense world syndrome perception. For example, some of them can feel and see energy in the room, like energy bounces from walls and whatever. Another thing is very important, emotional hypersensitivity. When we say, oh, they don't understand emotions, they cannot interpret their own emotions, this is absolutely true. Many of them can't. But many of them are emotionally hypersensitive. Let us look, emotions, how do they start? They're physical, right? They start, like if it is an angry person, you look at him and there is this red face and you can see it. So it is physical. And their senses are very hypersensitive. It means emotionally they are very hypersensitive. The problem is they cannot distinguish whether these are their own emotions or they are feeling somebody else's emotions. Stephen Shaw, professor in American University, and he has Asperger's syndrome, he coined the term echoemotica. He said it took him years to learn to distinguish what he is feeling in the body from his own emotions and his wife's emotions, for example. He said it takes so long. Now he mastered it. Now he knows. But when he couldn't, it was really, really sort of intolerable. Can you imagine? Feeling what is wrong, why? And because they are like, radios. He describes it in his books and talks about it. And of course, some stimuli, visual, auditory, smell, they cannot tolerate. It's just impossible. And for another thing is, it's not about the volume. It can be about unpredictability or unexpected. Any unexpected stimuli can bring this disturbance and pain and whatever. Especially telephones. Telephones can ring anytime. For example, some children will break telephones to protect themselves, not being naughty or not disciplined. Or some cannot tolerate babies crying. This was my son's case, and he would, when he was younger, but he was a child, he would attack a baby even if the baby was asleep. Again, if they are prepared for the sound, they feel better. You know what I mean? If they are prepared. Babies are unpredictable. They could start crying any time, and he would jump out of his skin. So it was easier for him to sort of hit a baby or whatever. But it wasn't easier for the baby, his mother, and myself. And that is why desensitization work, if I have time during questions, I will explain how it's been done. And this is Thomas McKean. There are certain things I touch that hurt my hands. For example, when I walk and they are brushing past my hands is a source of pain. Just a few ideas. And allergic reaction to perfume by Donna Williams. So again, remember what is very enjoyable for us, for example, fireworks may be fearful or overwhelming to an autistic individual. Because fireworks, it's not only this rocket, this bright light, but also the sound. My son even now, he hates it, but can tolerate it already. It's important to remember about colors. By the way, recent research, just a month ago, showed that many autistic people cannot tolerate the color yellow. I'm so happy because I suspected it for many years because I worked with children and including my son, they couldn't tolerate yellow color. And now there is research paper out there confirming this, and some of them can become physically ill, you know, like sick. Then always warn the person about the possibility of the stimulus and show the source of it. If they know what is going on, where it is coming from, then it will be easier. You cannot predict everything, it's impossible. So if there is sort of, you know, an ambulance with this alarm, you can show, look, this is an ambulance. The doctor is going to help somebody to take him or her to hospital. It makes it easier if they know what is going on. So disturbance may be caused by certain stimuli, too many stimuli, any sudden unpredictable stimuli, and what is more, many professionals at schools, for example, use ABC approach, right? Antecedent, behavior, consequence. I can tell you in many cases with autism it doesn't work. First, I have to make the statement, there is nothing out of the blue. No behavior in autism is out of the blue. Because I heard some teachers, oh, out of the blue he became aggressive. No, there is something. But we cannot find it with this ABC approach. I will explain why. Challenging behaviors caused by either present but invisible antecedent. If we cannot hear a microwave working 2 rooms from here, of course, it is sort of, we cannot identify this antecedent. Or if we cannot see this flickering of fluorescent lights and so on and so forth. Past antecedent, I told you already, right? If anything triggers the memory in the past and the memory is not very good, then we will have these challenging behaviors. The problem is you have to know this person. I was lucky because I spent a lot of time with my son because I was working with him, whether he goes somewhere or not. I always had my classes and whatever. I took him, when they were younger, my children, I like to take them to York. I think it is one of the most beautiful cities in England. I love it. For a day out. And on our way back, our first visit to York, he was still nonverbal, and that is before 7. And there was this gift shop in the corner, and I wanted to buy souvenirs just before the train station. But unfortunately, there were a few steps down, and he tripped over and hit the door, and I knew what would happen. So I grabbed him, and we ran away, because I knew this will be really difficult. And about 5 years ago, when he was 23, we went to York. And of course, I didn't remember anything about it. But we were walking to the station, back to the station, and suddenly he rushed forward. I couldn't believe it. He never runs away from me, you know. And then I saw this shop, and I remembered. It triggered my memory as well. And while I knew I couldn't keep up with him, because he was running, really running to this shop. And while running behind him, I was sort of preparing all these sort of scenarios, what I will tell the police and whatever. Because I didn't know, oh, he is a big young man, you know, and you know what he did? It was a relief. He kicked the door. Sort of revenge, the revenge was very sweet. Again, where is antecedent? If it had been somebody else, not me, there was no antecedent, right? It was out of the blue. It's only me who could connect it. I was lucky at this. Then again, probable future antecedents. It's like any unpredictable is bad, so they start destroying telephones, hitting babies or whatever. You know, anything they cannot predict. They try to do it now. For example, the baby is asleep, the baby didn't do anything, but he hit the baby, so why? To protect himself from this unpredictable stimuli. Last straw antecedents, because they are tired already, enough is enough, you know. And this one, very important, emotional state of carers and teachers. I have no time to explain everything properly. There is research, now we know about it. But again, you remember, they are like sort of feeling our emotions in their bodies as well. Just trust me, they are feeling, and they are disturbing. And if you, sometimes we trigger, our emotional state triggers these behaviors. For example, somebody, a teacher, has personal problems, divorce or whatever, and they come, you know, upset, but they think they are professional, they can manage. No, they can't. Because these kids, they can pick up this, and they don't understand what is going on, you know, and if they feel a bit anxious because they're feeling something in their bodies, that they would start, you know, these challenging behaviors, and the teacher would only add to this, sit down and would behave and whatever. So this is absolutely true. This happens all the time. My son knows when I return from my conferences, right, from abroad or whatever, by the sound I open the front door, he knows whether I'm happy, tired by happy, or not very happy. He knows this because the way he approaches me. If he knows that something is wrong, that you know, he runs, always waits for me to come back, always, doesn't matter what time, and brings my slippers and throws them into my direction and runs back to the bedroom. If he knows, that everything is okay, he stays there with my slippers and said, "What have you brought?" You know, as usual. So we have these two routines. He was never wrong. So as each individual is unique in their sensory perception, it is very difficult to adapt the environment. And by the way, if you put sort of, you know, different individuals with hyper and hypersensitivity to the same classroom, and I can promise the teacher will look for another place of employment very soon, because it is impossible to adopt the environment to different individuals' profiles. Some of them are very hypersensitive. Sometimes they look at bright lights, sunshine, or seek sounds, or if there is not enough sounds, they start sort of tapping, banging doors and whatever, creating some sounds in the environment. Like my son usually told me in the past, sometimes the world goes quiet, so quiet that the silence seems to be very loud. It is a very frightening experience. And some don't feel cold or hot. And Tito, this is of course an extreme example, he never felt his body. Can you imagine how frightening it is not to feel your body? How do you know that you exist? How do you know that you are alive? Just think about it, right? So I'm trying to show you as many experiences as possible. So it is very important to identify the stimuli the person cannot tolerate or find disturbing, eliminate them, or provide the sensory aids like tinted glasses for visually hypersensitive, or earplugs, and so on and so forth. And it's not good enough, because we can create the environment, safe environment at school, for example, and at home. I have no problems at home at all. But we cannot keep them there all their lives. We have to prepare them for the life in the society. That is why it is important to desensitize the person to tolerate the stimuli via sensory diets. I have no time to talk about it now, but perhaps at the end with questions. And if you think, okay, I know this child is hypersensitive visually, hypersensitive in smell, and you think pretty sure you know what to do, think again. Because their perception is inconsistent. They can both hyper and hypo to the same stimuli at different times of day or period of their life. For example, skin sensation was so unbearable 1 minute and yet completely unfelt next. Can you imagine unstable world? And everything is changing from day to day, hour to hour, sometimes even minute to minute. And that can be very frustrating. Perceptual styles, because they do develop adaptations and compensations. And I call this two perceptual styles. One is monoprocessing. We are multi-track. We use all our senses simultaneously. For example, I can see you, I can talk, I can hear the sounds from everywhere, from here, from there, from all directions. I am moving, I know I am moving. But for them, it is too much for some of them. They use one sense at a time. Look at this boy. He didn't blink when the picture was taken. He does everything via his tactile system. And he is very good at mathematics. We taught him to read, giving him plastic letters. And that is why we have to be very careful. If the person uses vision as their main sense, we can provide pictures. But if it is not vision, what is the point to, like the boy this, right? If you say, look at what you are doing, the boy will lose the ability to finish the task. So we have to remember about it. And peripheral perception. Avoidance of eye contact is one of the symptoms, if you like, of autism. First, two things. First, there is eye contact and eye contact. Sometimes the child will even turn your head and look into your eyes, you know. It is not eye contact. It is fascination with the movement or color of the eye. Eye contact, when we use it socially, and many of them, you see, I felt instantly unwell and sometimes terrified if I were face to face with a person. To look at any face from a social distance was intolerable. So they cannot tolerate this eye contact. Many of them can't. And by the way, the best, look at these boys dancing with their mothers, very happy, because they are with their backs to their mothers, right? There is no this any painful or threatening experiences. And that is why, yes, we have to teach them to look in the direction of the person, but not just, look at me. As soon as you say, look at me, the child will lose the ability, the child who is peripheral in visual perception will lose the ability to interpret what you are talking about. So never force eye contact and don't approach the person directly in his hypersensitive modalities, because it's not only about vision. And compensating for unreliable sense by other senses. One sense is never enough. Often children, young children, low functioning, we call them nonverbal, smell everything and everybody, right? And what do we say? Don't smell people, it is not nice. Of course it isn't nice, absolutely not. But if it is the most reliable channel, in fact we say shut down all the channels and then we will teach you. Instead of addressing their problems, like my son used to smell everything. He wouldn't touch his food, he had to smell it. His vision was 20/20, but I knew it was wrong. And when he started wearing his tinted glasses, he stopped smelling. His vision became reliable. You know what I mean? Don't take the only reliable channel from the child if you don't first address their problems. Function of stimmings, there are multiple. Another thing is, sorry, no time, right? I had to finish, and then we will have questions. And another thing is, you see, it used to see, Temple Grandin writes about it, there is a continuum of sensory processing problems. And this spectrum, autism spectrum, now more and more researchers see that it is better not to look at the spectrum because it's not very helpful, but phenotypes and subgroups of autism, because even in sensory profiles, there are subgroups of children or adults with autism. We can distinguish. There is a lot of research on this, and here are some names. So subtypes based on different patterns of sensory perception. I couldn't put all the research here, not enough space. And we are nearly there. No, please remember, no two autistic people appear to have this exactly same patterns of sensory perceptual experiences. And differences in perception may radically change because of cognitive, linguistic, emotional, social development, but lead to different development of different abilities, thinking styles, and communication. They are communicating with us. I'm not no time to explain this, but this one I have to explain. IQ and autism. So what is intelligence? You know what I don't like when they say, oh, she has this learning difficulties as well. You know what? There are learning difficulties and learning difficulties. Because if we take a child with Down syndrome, right, for example, an autistic child, their learning difficulties are very, very different. And I would say this so-called low-functioning, non-verbal children and adults are very intelligent autistically. They are even more, you see, what do we measure with IQ tests? IQ tests were designed to measure whether this child or person is delayed, right? But their development is very, very different. They can be brilliant at something and they can be very poor at something else. My son cannot tie up his laces. Okay, I buy him shoes without laces. Yeah, I've given up. But he is so good at other things, you know, and so on and so on. So, for example, as I told you, that he can sort of assess my emotional state while I'm still outside the door. Donna Williams writes a lot about her abilities, which are really, really different. And this being autistic, Jim Sinclair, does not mean being unable to learn, but it does mean there are differences in how learning happens. And so that is why we have to remember, we have to know the person and teach them working with autism, not against it. Because autism and his style, perceptual styles, and his cognitive autistic abilities will help you. And this one, please, this one is important, two more quotes. Measuring non-autistic people by autistic type of development would often find them failing miserably and appearing to be thoroughly subnormal by autistic standards. Trust me, this is true. And this one, non-autistics can be considered idiots in the autistic world too, just as it can be the other way around. Please remember about it. So the reality we believe exists depends on, okay, their reaction, no time. So there is so much to say. But anyway, please remember, their reactions and actions are logical. That's what I find, very logical, if you know what is going on. And rational, because they are dictated by their reality, which is very, very different from our normal reality. So the question remains, whose reality is more real? And learning about parallel worlds will help us understand and help each other. This is very important. And by the way, if you haven't got this book, please don't buy it. Because this is the first edition, this is the second published in the beginning of this year, and it's based on this book anyway. And please let us start learning to switch perspectives, and then, because which way are the stairs headed, up or down? Because otherwise they may go up and we may go down, you know what I mean? If we don't learn to switch to their perspective. And more good books. Thank you for your attention.